This video will serve as an introduction to the skeletal system. I'll be going over the basic functions of your skeletal system and how bones are structured. Your skeletal system has 5 important functions that I want to talk about. The first one is that it provides support for your body and the weight of your body. It provides a framework for your body's shape. Your face looks the way it does in part because of the shape of your skull underneath. And your body weight is being held up by your pelvis or your hips, plus your backbone or your vertebral column, plus your legs. And just think about all the weight of your organs that are being held up in your torso by that part of your skeleton. A second key function is that your skeleton protects internal organs. So inside your skull, of course, you have your brain, and inside your vertebrae of the backbone, you have your spinal cord. So they are encasing, they are surrounding the central nervous system and protecting those very important parts where all of the control of your body is happening. I think you already know that your ribs are surrounding your heart and lungs and keeping them safe. And then your pelvis protects much of the abdominal cavity, basically in the back side of your abdominal cavity, but we've already talked about with your muscles, you've got a number of layers of muscles in the front to kind of protect the front side. If you think about where your ribs end and where your hips begin, you realize there's really not much of your back, at least, that doesn't have your skeleton providing protection. A third key function of your skeletal system is allowing for movement. And of course, that involves your bones working together with the joints, the places where bones meet, and the muscles. Bones act as levers. They are taking the force from the muscle and translating it into movement. Most of the levers in your body are known as third-class levers, where a little bit of force by your muscles, a little distance that the muscles contract, allows a great deal of distance to happen at the end. So if you think about how far your hand moves when you contract your bicep, you get an idea about how that third-class lever allows your muscles not to change their length very much, but you to get a great range of motion with your arm and your hand. Your skeletal system also is responsible for producing your blood cells. And that happens in something called red bone marrow inside your bones. The red bone marrow is found in adults in places like the hip bone and the clavicle, the back of the shoulder blades. And this is the place where red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets are made. And finally, your skeletal system serves as a mineral reserve, a storehouse for key minerals such as calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium. These minerals are involved in building the mineral structure of your bones, but they also have roles in other parts of your body that are very essential. Calcium is involved in muscle contraction. Sodium and potassium are involved in nerve transmission. And so if the body is a little low in calcium, the bones will be robbed in order to allow muscle contraction to happen someplace important like your heart. Or likewise, if it's low in potassium or sodium, those minerals be taken out of the bone so that you still can have your nervous system sending messages around your body. There are 206 bones in the adult human skeleton. Babies are born with more bones because the bones of the skull have not fused together. So it's about 270 distinct bones as infants, but by the time you're an adult, you are down to 206 bones. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but they're all similar in their structure. They're put together in basically the same way. Before we get into structure, I just want to talk a little bit about the different shapes that your bones are found in. And I don't have any particular notes that you need for this, but you might want to write down a few things on your note sheet as we go through this. So the first type of bone shape is a long bone, and this is a bone that is longer than it is wide. You find the long bones in your long limbs, like they are the bones in your arm, both the upper and the lower part of your arm, and in your leg, but also your finger bones are made of long bones because they are longer than they are wide. There are also short bones that are basically like little cubes, little like the size of a die, something that looks like a box, a small box. And so they are, the example here are the bones found in your wrist, the carpal bones. If you think about carpal tunnel syndrome, that's happening at your wrist. So carpal means wrist. And so these are bones that are basically the same length as width. They're basically little cubes. Then you have bones that are basically flat. The example given in this picture is part of your skull. I mean, it's flat with a bit of a curve, but certainly along the sides of your heads it's fairly flat. Your ribs are pretty much flat bones. If you've ever had ribs in a restaurant, you know that those bones are kind of flat. Then there are bones that really don't have any distinct shape that we can characterize them as, so they just get called irregular bones. Things like your spinal column, the vertebrae in your spinal column, come in basically the same kind of shape, but they're just sort of lumpy and bumpy and go out in different directions. And so that's known as a regular bone. Then there are bones that match up with each other with sort of this zigzag connection called a suture. So they're showing you a picture here. Those are found in your skull. In order for your skull and face to develop, you have many, many bones that are going to each grow along the edges and allow the whole head to expand. So your head cannot be all one bone because there's just no way it could get bigger and maintain its shape. And then the last category of bones are sesamoid bones, and these are ones that are completely encased by tendons. So this patella is your kneecap, and if we were to draw in the tendons, you'd see tendons all the way around holding your kneecap. In fact, you don't have a kneecap when you are born. It develops from the stress of crawling. So as babies go from just sort of lying around or maybe sitting around to actively moving and crawling on their knees, the body develops the kneecap, develops this bone, this sesamoid bone, as a response to the stress. So any kind of bone that develops in response to stress is known as a sesamoid bone. Other ones, kneecaps are good, you want those. But things like bone spurs, people often get heel spurs in their foot because of stress. Those are not always wanted, but they're another example of a bone that can develop because of stress put in a particular part of the body. So now turning to the structure of the bone, we're using a long bone as an example, but basically you can find these parts in most of the bones of your body. The outside of the bone is known as compact bone. It is a very hard, dense layer that goes all the way around the outside. So on this illustration, the compact bone is just this hard edge, this thick edge that you see all the way around. But then, especially on the ends of the bone, you can see what's known as spongy bone, which looks kind of like a sponge. It has more holes in it, but it's not soft. It is hard bone that provides strength and protection against stresses coming from various directions. So just kind of draw a little illustration over here on this bone. If you have sort of these open spaces and little trusses that are going across in different directions, then no matter where the stress comes from, if it comes from this way, you've got a truss that can take care of it. If it comes from this way, you've got a piece of the bone that's going to provide support. If it comes over here, then you have another section. And so your spongy bone is actually like the trusses on a bridge. It's really giving a lot of strength. You don't want it too porous, osteoporosis, which will develop sometimes in elderly people. That spongy bone has too big of a space in it, but the fact that it's not completely solid is actually a good thing because it provides more strength than it would have if it was completely solid. Then in this long bone, it would be in the center of this bone, you would see red bone marrow. So this part, if this bone was still on a live person and it was cut open, or a live cow, I'm not sure what kind of bone it is, that would be colored red because this would be where you're finding your red blood cells. So the red bone marrow is where red blood cells are produced. In young children, it's produced in lots and lots of different bones. As you age, certain ones shut down, but you still are producing blood cells all of your life, and so you will have red bone marrow found in some of your bones. The very outside layer of the bone is the periosteum. This means it's going around the bone, and so it is a thin layer of connective tissue that really is just all the way along the outside of the bone. It's the outermost layer, and it will morph into a tendon, so it will slowly change into cells that will grow into a tendon, coming off down, so just sort of diagramming, a tendon coming out here, and then that will eventually then turn into a muscle. The tendon will be surrounding the muscle as connective tissue around that muscle. So as that happens, it's just that transitions from the periosteum to a tendon to the connective tissue around a muscle. You don't have zippers or snaps or buttons to attach things. Basically, cells just slowly change from one type into another as the function for that particular part of the body changes. At the very end of your bones where you have movable joints, you will also see cartilage, which is a very smooth layer of connective tissue which protects the ends of the bone. So if this was in a live creature, you would see cartilage down here at the end of this bone protecting this joint. We'd have cartilage around the socket joint that we have. This is a femur of something. And so that cartilage can be seen on chicken bones. If you look at raw chicken, it's the pearly white stuff on the end. And cartilage is important because it keeps the end of the bone from rubbing against another bone. Bone-on-bone connection is very painful. It is what happens in osteoarthritis. People lose that protective coating of cartilage because their joints are basically get worn down because of age. And so arthritis can be very painful, and it's because bone is rubbing directly on bone. Here's another diagram of a bone pointing out a few other things that weren't present on the other one. We have yellow bone marrow found inside many of your long bones, and it is actually fat. It's like the final place of fat storage. If you were starving and you used all of the fat that was underneath your skin and around your organs, maybe this tiny bit of fat that's stored in your long bones could help keep you going until food supplies get better. The environmentalist scientists who are studying food systems and animals that perhaps die of starvation, they will look at the yellow bone marrow to see how hungry these animals were. Also, we see the blood vessels coming because blood supply has to come to bone cells. Bones are alive. They are containing bone cells. We'll see a picture in a minute. Those cells need nutrients, they need to do cellular respiration, they need oxygen and glucose, and so your blood vessels are coming, but they actually have to enter the bone through holes because the bone is solid, and so you will have little holes in the bone, and if you can imagine, these blood vessels have to come in from the outside to get into the bone itself. This is the illustration of a bone from a young creature, a young organism, because it is still growing. We see this line here. This line is what's the spot known as the growth plate or the epiphyseal plate, and we'll see another slide with an x-ray in a minute. But that is where the bone is actually growing. Along this growth plate, it is cartilage, not solid bone, that then gets transformed into bone and allows the bone to lengthen in both directions. So as I said, bone is alive and it's actually made up of several things. It is a crystalline mineral matrix. It does have minerals like calcium and magnesium and phosphate. But these minerals are surrounded by a protein. Collagen is the particular protein. And so bones are a combination of protein and minerals. Bones are built by bone cells known as osteocytes. And those bone cells then are supported by blood vessels that bring in nutrients and carry away wastes, and your whole nervous system. If you've ever broken a bone, you know it hurts. The bone cells are actually these what looks like little spots, little dotted lines here. And those osteocytes, you can see they're surrounded by a lot of stuff, and that stuff around outside of those cells is the combination of the collagen and the mineral matrix. The osteocytes arrange themselves in this circular pattern you see here. Those are called osteons. And so they are also kind of characteristic of bone tissue as you see all these circular patterns. The dark spot in the center is where blood vessels and nerve cells will travel along that central canal, and then the various nutrients can diffuse out through the bone tissue. So this slide has an x-ray, an actual x-ray where you can see the epiphyseal plate, the growth plate that we saw on the diagram earlier. And as I said, this is where bone is growing. It is not hard bone at this point. It is cartilage. And it's one of the signs that a doctor can use to tell you whether you have reached your full height or not, or a forensic anthropologist could use to kind of estimate the age of the bones. You can see with the x-ray on the right, there's no longer a line visible, so the person that these bones belong to has stopped growing. They have reached their full height. Now, if you want to have strong bones, you do have to think about eating the right foods to provide the supplies to build those bones. So strong bones are built through proper nutrition. I mean, you may have been told, drink milk to build bones, and certainly calcium. You need to have an intake of calcium, adequate minerals, and the protein, or the amino acids from your different protein sources that can be recombined to make collagen. There are also several vitamins that are very important in bone building, vitamin D being one of those. And so that is the sunshine vitamin. You can make it in your skin if you are out in the sun, but if you're someone who has very fair skin or tends to avoid the sun, it is something that you might want to look for supplementing, or it is put in dairy products to try to help build strong bones. But the other thing that builds strong bones is resistance. Bones respond to being used. Like your muscles, you need to use them or you lose them. Weight-bearing activities cause bone cells to make more mineral crystals to make the bones stronger. So that anything that's going to have a weight put on that bones to stress that bone is something that will help make it stronger, will build the bones. If you have a situation of being in bed rest or you're in zero gravity, like these pictures that I'm showing you over on the right, the bones will actually decrease in thickness and strength because they are not being asked to bear weight 24/7. So astronauts have a variety of interesting machines that they can use on the International Space Station to try to put stress on their bones. You can see that like the person on the treadmill has to be tied down with straps because she would be floating away. And so it's more difficult to maintain your bone strength and your muscle mass if you are in a weightless environment. And astronauts really work hard to maintain their body's functionality, but they do lose. They have to come home and rebuild their bones because being in gravity 24/7 just can't compare to working out on a machine for a couple of hours. So it is important not only to eat right, but you also need to use your bones. You need to ask them to respond to gravity, to respond to weight, and that's what truly makes them strong. So finally, in summary, your skeletal system, your bones have 5 key functions. They provide support to hold up your body. They protect your internal organs. They allow you to move, working with your muscles and joints. They produce blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets involved in clotting. And they serve as a mineral reserve or mineral storehouse for those minerals that are important in making bone, but also in many other even more crucial processes in your body. Bones come in many shapes and sizes to fulfill all of the functional roles that they have for movement and protection. Bones are built from both minerals and protein, so calcium by itself is not going to build bones. And bones need stress. They need some resistance to stay strong. You need to use them to keep them in good shape.